Today, flipping and flopping in New Zealand. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian and New Zealand flavour. And today I'm joined again by Joe Wilkes. Hello Joe, good to see you again.
Good morning, Martin. How are you?
Very good. How you been?
Very well, Martin. No, good to see you again. We had a chat recently about the whole bail-in and bail-out legislation, which I think we've had some really positive feedback on from that posting. And I thought rather than just stick to us talking, I'd go out and about again and have a little wander around a different market. Previously, we did our out and about in sunny New Zealand, which wasn't so sunny up in Tauranga. I thought what I'd do this time is look at a slightly different marketplace. It's New Zealand's obviously had a lot of property investment. A lot of investors are involved in buying and selling houses. There's all sorts of possibilities of changes in legislation. We've got a bright line test at the moment set at 2 years, so owners of investment properties have to hold for 2 years before they can resell. And there is the talk that might be extended out to 5 years. And I thought, well, what I'd do is go to a very different market, not a coastal market, but a town towards the southern end of the North Island, about 150 kilometres north of Wellington. And I wanted to go and see Palmerston North because I've heard lots about it. It's a growing economy. It's an area where they've got the benefit of a good university town. They've got a lot of agriculture in the Waikato, so it's a very productive sector. And it's a central hub, really, for the transmission of goods from the ports in the north to the south, and from the south through to the north. So, quite a bit going on. I've not been there for a few years, so it was interesting to go back and see it again with fresh eyes. There's been a remarkable amount of change, much of which I was quite impressed with. I just wanted to have a sort of a holistic view of, okay, well, there's talk in Palmy about housing shortage. There's talk about, well, we've got a homelessness issue, which none of which are good societally. And I wanted to sort of expand on some research that I'd done separately in October on the market, and just sort of see what's going on, because I think that there's a narrative about a shortage that, again, may not be entirely true.
Well, it's interesting, of course, because I guess there's one question which is there an absolute shortage? And the other question is there a shortage in a particular area? Because I think a lot of the discussion generally is too high level, right, to be useful. So it's useful to get into, look at a more local area and understand some of the dynamics. I often say the thing about property is you've got micro markets and therefore some different dynamics. So you really have to get quite specific.
Absolutely, and I think New Zealand is a proper example of that, because you have got so many major towns that are quite a long way away from one another. I mean, Wellington really is the closest major town to Palmerston North. That's 150 kilometres away. You've got probably another 150 kilometres or so out to the Hawke's Bay. Tauranga is probably 300 or 400, well, no, maybe 300 kilometres north of Palmerston, or northeast of Palmerston, and then Auckland, 450 kilometres to the north. So it's we do have very, very different functioning markets. And what I think's happened over the last few years is, as this property hype has been magnified, and the whole I've got to get in, got to buy, get some capital gains and move on. With Auckland becoming very expensive to do that for your, what I'd call your mum and dad entry level investor, the other areas, the other regions have borne the brunt of the property speculation. So I went out yesterday, Monday morning, thought I'd have a drive around the area and see what was going on. I went to a number of developments, literally drove in and immediately came across a couple of sites on the southern side of southern side of Palmerston North, and it was it was quite interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on. Same picture of what we saw with this land and home package scenario, people buying a plot, building it.
Morning everybody, we're keeping it classy and palmy, and we've got another little development site going on down here. Jake back home's been busy, they were building all over the last place. So what do we got? We've got a lot of new houses. Let's have a little drive around. Okay, so down here, someone's put their rubbish bins out. That means there might be somebody living in that one. That's a good sign. Down here, there's nobody living in that one. So this is another site on the outskirts of Palmerston, beyond the nursing home, which I thought was already quite a long way out for old people. Bless them. And we've got some construction happening here, some construction not happening next door. Oh, that's for sale, so they don't want us to build that one. Quite fascinating. That one's for sale. So it's quite interesting when you drive around. I reckon I've already driven past maybe 100 new homes for sale so far today, and yet on TradeMe there's only about 180 properties for sale. So I'm not sure whether we're getting the whole truth and nothing but the truth about what the real situation of the Palmerston North housing market is. So we've got what's going on here. I'm just going to stop as I can. Just move the camera from its fixed position. There's another one been built up there. They've been quite skilled carpenters actually to do all this timber. And some more. It's Monday morning, so it's not surprising it's quiet. Another one for sale, and by the looks of it, this is the diggers into whatever's going to go on down here. So I presume somebody's acquired all of this because I started thinking about the roads, although those guys don't look particularly busy this morning. So maybe they need to sell some of the others in this site first before they start putting any more roads in. Nice place for kids to play though, around the diggers and that. Right, okay, on we go. I'm going to turn us off now. We're going to move on to another site. I've heard speaking to one of the builders here, but there's actually this is tiny compared to what's going on elsewhere in Palmy, so we're going to see if we can find that. Okay, so Palmerston North, here we go. We've got some more building going on out the back here. Little rubbish skip. I'm just going to put the camera down on the front windscreen and we can drive around and talk as we go. It's nice and safe that way. So yeah, here we go. We've got some more development. There are some people living in a few of these. That one's just being done. A little bit noisy. One up the road on the left hand side looks like it's finished. And there's some people living in a few. Nice houses actually. These seem to be a little bit more robust than some of the ones that I was looking at the weekend. We'll go down here. So we've got somebody living in there but not mowing their lawn. Empty plot. There's a few. I'm just going to drive up here. So we've got a few going on up here. I'll have to drive up and reverse back nice and safely. So all these cars, I'm guessing, are built this. So we've got some work going on down here. They all seem to be happy. Anyway, it's sunny today. Nice day to be outside building a house. Let's have a little look down this one here. Lovely view, that one. These are all full. It's a bit of a bugger there because you've got to reverse back out, you can't turn round. Now this isn't a big site, this is only probably, I guess, maybe 100 houses. We've got one for sale there. I'm not don't understand really in New Zealand. You've got all this wonderful space, and they build houses on top of one another. So let's have a look up here. So for sale lot. Okay. So yeah, we've got building, a couple for sale here by the looks of it. One there, and that looks like a site which is this stuff here. So yeah, it's all ongoing. It's pretty busy. Right, I've been driving around Palmerston North for the last couple of hours, and so it's making me hungry. And why do they put those great big golden arches up there when you really should hanker for something healthy at lunchtime, and all you want is a Big Mac? So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Go for a Big Mac. God bless McDonald's.
I was a bit disappointed because we've got so much space in New Zealand, and we have these sites where they're still cramming properties onto tiny little sections, whereas actually if there was some better planning, you could almost build another town 5 or 6 kilometres down the road and have proper infrastructure, proper housing, proper family spaces, proper areas where communities can develop. But instead what seems to happen is some lucky landowner gets the permission to turn, I guess, ex-industrial or agricultural land into a development site. And then there's this rush to try and cram as many tiny little plots on it as you can. So I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't a better control of what is being built around Palmerston. And there has been quite a bit of building. There are 2 or 3 big sites that are underway. Houses, again, in various states of undress, with shells next to finished houses, things that are being returned to the market. And it all sort of painted the picture to me of again this flipping and flopping that people have been doing in the market. Just to sort of go over some data that I researched back in October. So this was done on the 11th of October. I looked at Palmerston North in specific to the number of listings that there were on Trade Me, which is a major property portal in New Zealand. And then I was able to go, because Trade Me offer a little facility, which is a valuation tool, which sometimes tells you when a house was last sold. And if you can't find it from Trade Me, then you can go to 2 other sites. One is Quotable Value, and the other is a site called homes.co.nz. And between using what's currently for sale and these 3 sites, I was able to actually get a lot of information about how long people are holding houses for. And I was in the UK, and the old adage was that people moved every 7 to 10 years. And over the last 10 or 15 years, with the growth in property prices, and then I suppose the flatlining of the credit markets, which really have, the credit market's grown 11% in the last 10 years. It's not grown massively. What we found is that period of time that people move has gone out from 7 to 10 years. It's now 15 to 18 years. Between transactions. Completely different scenario in Palmerston North. So on October the 11th of this year, there were 175 listings on Trade Me for Palmerston North, and I uncovered the following. Of those 175, 45 listings were new builds or plots for sale. Most of those new builds were finished. There was probably a split of 1/3 plots to 2/3 new builds. Now, I drove round over probably a couple of hundred new builds that were underway and under construction. So there's a lot of stuff there's for sale boards up, and I couldn't find them when I was driving around. I couldn't find the actual listing for them. So there's a for sale board up, but there's no listing for them anywhere. I don't know whether that's developers not wanting to put all of their stock on the market at the same time, or whether it's the seasonality of Christmas. Of those 175 listings, so you've got 45 or so new builds. 3 listings were actually bought this year and are already back on the market. So people aren't holding them very long. Now, is that a sign of mortgage stress, or is that a sign of flipping property? 11 listings of the 175, so 6.2% of them were only bought in 2017. This is an interesting one. 25 listings out of the 175, 14.3% of the market were bought in 2016. So, bright line, I've had it for 2 years, great, I can get it back onto the market. Now, I can understand why people have done it, because they're trying to fund their retirements or they're trying to make a quick buck. But it doesn't help the tenant who thinks, well, they've just signed a 6-month or a 12-month rental, then all of a sudden they think they've got a proper landlord, and that landlord is not a proper landlord because 14.3% of properties are back on the market already. So it's either the landlord's doing it, or we're seeing a sign of people who bought in 2016, which seems to be the top of the Auckland market, and now they're already trying to sell back into the Palmerston market.
So, Joe, just a quick question. So the 2-year thing, is that to do with capital gains, or
yeah,
what precisely?
No capital gains at the moment. There's no capital gains after 2 years.
Okay.
There's been some interesting developments since we last spoke. Sir Michael Cullen, he's looking at various tax changes. There has been a first reading in the New Zealand Parliament for a change to the laws around negative gearing. So people who are offsetting losses against property, against their personal income. That's had its first reading through the House. I'm not expecting this to happen overnight, because the foreign buyer ban took from October last year through to October this year to get passed. It was passed in July, but not enacted until October. So there's a bit of time on this. But to be fair, these figures are back in October, so this is before this reading's happened. 7 listings were purchased in 2015, so 4% of people selling again. 8 listings were purchased in 2014, 7 in 2013, 7 in 2012, 8 in 2010-11, which would be a more normal cycle. And then 22 between 2000 and 2009, 6 listings between 1990 and 1999, and 5 listings were purchased pre-1990. There was no data on any of the websites for 21 of the listings, so 12% of the data I couldn't find information on. But you just add up the first few, so you've got 25.6% of what I could find was new, or probably land acquired at the top of the market and built at the top of the market for top of the market prices. 3 bought and sold this year, 11 in 2017, 25 in 2016. You've got best part of over half the market. It's very, very recently acquired. So fundamentally, that presents a challenge, and I wanted to dig a bit deeper into Palmerston. So I did a further drive around, and I had a chat with a few locals. Some were not keen to be put on camera. I did find a couple of really lovely young lads who I asked about the homeless crisis and whether or not it affected Palmerston North, and they were brilliant. The young guys, and they said, yes, we've got 6 homeless people. Which is not nice, because that means the society's failed in some way to provide a roof for these people. But 6, in the grand scheme of the population of Palmerston North, is not an enormous number.
We're in Palmerston North today. I've not been here for a long time. My wife used to go to university here many, many moons ago, and she did bring me here on a couple of occasions just to go and visit old friends. So today we're having a little drive around. It's been smartened up a little bit since I was last in. Some nice stuff going on down here. Oh, excuse me. Alright, so we're going to have a little look at Palmy today. I've just had a chat with a couple of young chaps. They're very helpful. I asked them about New Zealand's homelessness problem and whether they were aware of homelessness being an issue in Palmerston North, and they've said yes, it is an issue. There are 6 people who are homeless that they know about, and what they call regulars around the square at the end of the day. So that's not a nice thing, but at the same point, 6 is not an enormous number for a city the size of Palmerston North. So yeah, we've just been to look at a couple of developments on the south side of Palmerston as you come in, and I'm now heading down Main Street, because one of the builders that I spoke to down on one of the last sites said Main Street's had some development. So I'm going to switch off and I will see you when I get to the next site.
I drove down Main Street and came across a big site which has been ongoing, and all of that has been built since I was last in Palmerston, probably 6 or 7 years ago. There's got to be a good 2,000 or 3,000 houses that have been built up there, and there's more planning. There's roading in. I had a drive across the southern side and just out across swathes of land and this was really interesting because there were good couple of hundred plots there where the roads are in. You're up on a hill. You've got quite a nice outlook. It's a lovely setting, but the development is really patchy. And there was a big swathe of land where I guess 50% of the plots have been sold, but nobody's building.
Good morning, New Zealand. We are in Palmerston North today. We're driving around. We're taking a look at some developments that are happening. We've got a couple of bits and pieces going on down here. If you look over there, you can see that there's road and infrastructure gone in for quite a lot of plots and sections by the looks of it. So we're going to have a little drive around. This is the Wilkes development. I'm just going to stick this camera out the window. Hopefully we can get an idea of what's going on. So got one finished. Got bits being built. That looks horrendous. That's better. You can live next to the daisies where they bought the plot. There's another one for sale, another plot for sale there. And somebody's done something there to get it ready. Got an occupied house by the looks of it, next to one that's being built. More down there. Just going up the road here. So here we have some more construction underway. This too is not an enormous site yet. There's been some building over the last little while. Let's have a little look and see what Wilkes Heights has to offer in terms of land and sections. This is the whole thing in New Zealand. We get people involved in buying sections and sites and put a road in and let them get on with it. So I don't know, I can't see any for sale sites. I've got lots down here, so for lot 35, lot 36. I don't know how long this has been going on for. There's no for sale sign up, so I'm presuming that they've been purchased. So there are old sale signs on the floor, so they may well have been bought now. I remember when all this were out but fields, and it still is at the moment. So no, they are sold. All of these sections are sold. That one's not. That one's not. So it does look like people have been buying up here with the dream of building their empire, perhaps. Buy it, build it, flip it on, off we go. Robert's father's brother. So yeah, there's a lot of space. There's no shortage of land area around Palmerston. I'll turn this off for a little while. We'll go and find somewhere else.
And that is another lead indicator for me that we've had probably some local buying and selling of land, hold the land, maybe sell it back into the market, but nobody's actually gone and invested further to actually build a bloody house. So I don't think there's strain in the Palmerston market. It's not a market that I think you're going to see a major panic or a collapse in prices or anything like that. You're starting from a very low, a much lower price level than you see in other parts of the country. But I think that what I would say is that the risks are that how much more of this flipping properties is there. How many people are exposed to these land purchases and half-developed properties, and what happens when all of them come into the market? Because many of these properties will be coming into the market over the next 12 months. I would imagine. The sections seem to be they're much more reasonable than if you look around the rest of the country, which would, I suppose, explain if you were if you're looking at a market and saying, well, it's better value than it is here in Auckland, or it's better value than it is in Wellington, I'll go and buy a plot there for 150 to 250,000, rather than spending 400 or 300 to 450,000 in Wellington and 600, 700,000 up in Auckland. It allows the perpetuation of property investment in land and speculation to continue by encouraging this move to the regions. I don't think it's what you've seen with the Australian hype and pushing of places like Hobart. It's a great place to get in. It's very much end of cycle stuff where these places are the last to rise. And Palmerston's performed terrifically over the last year or two in terms of an asset. But my feelings are that we're probably close to the end of that growth there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't surveyed in New Zealand, but in Australia, that there is definitely still a strong view that if I can buy a plot somewhere, and even if I can't build on it now, I'm going to hold it because that is going to increase in value over the medium term. So effectively, it's an asset. It's never going to go down. So therefore, even if I can't develop it, I can benefit from it. And then, of course, the second part of it, and of course, if I can then build on it and then flip it once I've actually gone through that process. And again, there are some limits within which you can do that. You can then make a turn, and then I do it again, and I do it again and again, right? And it's that perpetuation of the cycle, which I think is so interesting because I didn't see that really in the UK. But we do see it in Australia, and you're clearly seeing it in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I think the UK, there's been obviously you've got a lot of greenbelt land in the UK, so that sort of provides a protection. We have a lot more regulation, I think, of what gets siphoned off. I mean, I was surprised at some of the sites that I looked at. It was like, well, okay, this farmer's field has been, I don't know, this one's been granted permission. Why haven't the other 10 across the other side of the road been granted permission? And that could happen. I mean, if a farmer's got the right connections with the council, he's decided he doesn't fancy doing farming anymore, then all of a sudden, you don't have to go far from the centre of Palmerston North, 2 or 3 kilometres from the centre of Palmerston North, and you're into open countryside. So none of it is a tough commute if you're working in the city itself. And I'd be a little bit concerned that, okay, well, you've gone and this farmer's released all of this land, and yes, there's a road in, and I've just gone and bought a plot for a couple of $100,000, and then all of a sudden somebody on the other side of the town says, oh, well, I've just got permission to release 50 hectares of land for development, and I'll put a land in and I'll sell my plots for $100,000. If you're in a landmass as dense as Hong Kong or Singapore, then I could understand it, but you're not. There's no shortage of land that could be developed around Palmerston North. So it's I've seen it happen before. I mean, there was a big thing in the UK, a company, I can't remember the name. Yes, I can. They were called Property Spy. They ended up being on Watchdog and the various legal cases against them. But what they did is they took greenbelt land, which is protected land around major urban centres, typically agricultural, and they would take parcels. So they'd buy a farmer's field off them at £16,000 an acre, and then plot it up. So each acre had eight plots on it. And they would sell it speculatively to end users. They were doing it all over large parts of the southeast of England, and when you're buying at 16,000 an acre and selling them on for 400,000 or 500,000 an acre, it's quite a nice little business model. It lasted for I think about 10 years, from 1998 to 2007, and lots of people have bought this land. There were even people selling them back through on a secondary exchange. The last people who bought them still sat on them. They haven't been converted into developable land, and as a result, you're stuck there with something that doesn't offer enough land to produce anything on, and it's just there on the hope maybe in 200 years that the government will release it for development. I don't think we have those types of scenario in New Zealand. There is so much land. The other thing that I was a bit disappointed with, and hopefully you'll show the clip, was when I was going around the centre of Palmerston, and there's some really lovely houses in Palmerston North. They've got some cracking old buildings, which are they're part of New Zealand's heritage. They're beautiful. There are some less impressive buildings. And what, for me, we are now in the 21st century. What really disappointed me was what we're building. Fair enough in the 50s, times were tight. We were, struggling post-war. Everybody's, minded themselves, and I think, watching the pennies. We're building some absolutely awful social housing. So positive is the 6 people who were homeless in Palmerston. There might be an option, because I saw quite a few of these Lego constructed buildings. But there's no thought about, you want to provide social housing that people can at least get something out of a life. Give them a garden, give them somewhere so that they can park a car and have a job and go to work. What we seem to have done is just constructed rabbit hutches. That, I'm not kidding. I've seen buildings more impressive on Brighton Beach, where people store the sand gear for the summer. Actually, not on Brighton. That's a pebbly beach, but Bournemouth Beach. So we're not really thinking about the type of building that we're going to provide. And we haven't done a Kiwi build post, as I haven't been around a Kiwi build site yet. But I will make it with a bit of help from our watchers. I'll make it around there, and we'll go and do a report on some of these Kiwi build sites at some point.
Yeah, but I guess standing back, what you're saying is that the tactical, sell a plot, build a plot, flip it, is actually a million miles from the more strategic approach to planning and residential development that actually, from a societal perspective, we really need to be able to work out where we're going to put the future buildings and the appropriate supporting infrastructure, so that effectively we end up with self-contained communities that work, rather than just a speculative based sprawl, which is what I think you're highlighting at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think the trip to Tauranga, this trip, has just highlighted to me that we've put too much. Whether it's the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, there's no point blaming the governments that have gone before and the government that we've got now. But we do need to start thinking better about the communities of the future. Tauranga highlighted it in the first instance because there was development going on willy-nilly all over the place, and because it's not structured, and you can't have 400 developers of a site all with their different agendas on whether they're going to bother building, whether they're just holding something for 5 years or 10 years or however long it might be until it's worth reselling, whether they're going to start building and run out of money, which is a risk with these sites. So you end up with the areas that aren't aesthetically pleasing. There needs to be a better focus. The Kiwi build idea is a good idea. I'm not generally in favour of too much government control. It has to be private led, but the government have to provide the infrastructure of where we're going to do it, and think about, okay, well, this is the right way for the future. This is where we're going to be able to maximise the return. There is no shortage of land. We don't have that. We don't have any of those worries that other areas and other countries do have. So we have a really great opportunity to get it right and start thinking about it for generations to come.
Yeah, I think exactly right. And I guess my last question to you today is, what's the position with regard to revenue generation for, I think, like councils? Because I think, is there stamp duty, and do people actually effectively get a clip of the ticket? So every time there's a transaction, and so is that another driver of some of the behaviour we're seeing?
Yeah, I think yes, it is. We don't have stamp duty, so there's no stamp duty to purchase property or land in New Zealand. We don't have capital gains at the other end, although that may change. So that's again incentivizing the speculation. What we do have is councils who are for production of certificates for initial getting the planning passed. It is ludicrously expensive. Getting facilities in is also ludicrously expensive, and the council costs are. I've spoken to a number of developers, and a large part of the cost of their production. So people have to earn a living. You buy the land at whatever you can buy it at, and you build it, and you try and make the money. Material costs are high in New Zealand. We don't have enough suppliers of materials. It's really dominated by a couple of big firms, but the council costs do make up maybe a 10 to 15% of the overall cost of production. You go to the UK. I'm not saying we're equally bad. The bureaucracy, the amount of time that things take to get through planning, we have so many more regulations and land laws that have been added onto certain parcels of land. Section 106 is all the other bits and pieces that go with the old titles, and you've got to be careful, but lawyers been involved for several hundred years rather than a couple of hundred. So yeah, we have lots of blocks, but I don't think the costs from the actual council side is nearly as great as it is in New Zealand.
Sounds as though flipping and flopping is definitely the trend.
Very much so.
Joe, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.